What's up, gang? Welcome to the Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius from Shazday. I'm so pumped to have you here with me. Now, listen, the Greatness Machine, we're about two things. Number one, people who are living their passions. And number two, those who are creating greatness in the world and doing both of these things despite the odds against them. Each episode, we're going to feature interviews with game changers, business leaders, telling us their origin stories, what made them tick, what got them to where they are now. Why? So it can help you step into your greatness within your life, your business, and your career. Occasionally, you might hear a few solo episodes from myself, more as I leverage my 20 years of entrepreneurship as a CEO and founder to help you grow and level up in your journey to scale your life and your business. So, come be a fly on the wall, enjoy the conversation, and I'm stoked to have you here with me. Guys, welcome to today's episode of The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius from Shazday, and boy, do we have a special guest. Gabby Reece is in the house. Gabby, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Darius. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. So normally when we start the show, I kind of give background on how this came to be. But for listeners who are new to the show, The Greatness Machine, we're about two things. People are living their passions and those creating greatness in the world. And Gabby is neither short of passion nor greatness. So excited to dig into all the amazing things you've done. But I always like to give a little bit of background on again, how the show comes to be. So I'm going, well, first of all, so I have a business. And I said, hey, I don't want to work the week of Thanksgiving. I don't work the last 2 weeks of the year. And so I wasn't paying attention to my schedule. And I looked, I'm like, when's my next show? Because I was off last week.
Sure.
And I didn't see that your team had booked you for us. And so I'm like, oh my God, I have a show tomorrow. And it's with Gabby Reece, which we've been trying to book you for a bit. So I was like, I'm not prepared. So I spent the whole morning preparing. But my gosh, it was a really pleasant surprise, and we've been wanting to have you on the show for a while because you've done so many amazing things. So, yeah, it's really a pleasure to have you. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Oh, it's always an honor if somebody wants to talk to you. If people lose sight of that, I think they lose the plot a little bit.
Yeah. I believe that, right? Like, I think some people are like, they maybe get asked by a lot of folks and they want to be choosy, but I'm with you. It's like, especially if you've done cool things in your life and people want to know about it. I mean, I'll tell you my perspective on this, and we'll go into your bio in a second here for maybe listeners who are less familiar with your work. I look at folks who, especially one of the reasons why I do the show is I want to get people's voices out there that have done the hard things. I think it's hard to do the hard things, right? And if we're living in our passions and we're living in our talents, and we can, use our God-given strengths to create cool things in the world, I, for one, want to learn how people do it and how do they navigate it, because I think that this is a complicated world we live in where doing hard things is hard. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I just think we've separated too much from hard, and I think hard or challenging or difficult is another shade of life that we're living in, like sleep and love and eating. I think we've made hard like this thing over there versus, oh, that's also one of the things I do, which is hard things. Because I mean, we've all heard if it's sort of worth it, it usually has some challenges around it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it's like who is it, like Jocko Willink that says, embrace the suck, right? Or maybe that comes from the Navy SEALs, right?
Sure. And I don't know how we've gotten out of touch with that. I think, the way people used to live, it was like their hard was just built into your everyday, and it didn't become such a curious thing that we're like, we're going to do something hard. It was like, if you wanted to eat or you had to kill animals or build something, it was hard. So maybe it's a reframing of living a little bit.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I can't wait to get into this show. So I want to give your formal bio for listeners who maybe don't know the full story or less familiar. So, man, when I was doing the research on the show, and my team does research, but I'm kind of a perfectionist, so I'll double back and do my own work because I don't know if you're familiar with Gallup Strength Finder. You ever done that before? That tool?
Yeah, I mean, I know what it is.
Yeah, it's a cool tool. So my number 4 strength is individualization, which means I always want to know people's personal stories, which is probably one of the reasons I do the show. But you are, first and foremost, you're a volleyball legend, sports and health and fitness icon, world-class model, TV host, actor, and on-screen personality. Can't wait to talk about that. business person, TED speaker, and New York Times bestseller, as well as fellow podcaster with your show, The Gabby Reece Show. And most importantly, wife and mother. I think we always got to put family first. So, man, you have a full plate. How do you do it?
Well, I've pondered this more lately, because I think as you move through life, you kind of hopefully you keep looking at things and re-looking at them, and then maybe looking at them differently. And I think, first of all, it's the idea that I sort of chose to do a lot of these things, and it's embracing it with this idea of like, oh yes, this has been my choice. And, decent. I think also it's sort of like I'm decently organized, and I don't make everything urgent all at one time. I think, sports was very helpful, because you can understand that you feel pressure, but you don't also have to respond to the pressure. And also you can't be responding to things that haven't quite happened yet. So I think one skill that has really been helpful for me, which is to notice that I'm like, oh, I feel a little pressure around that, but not to feel like I have to respond so much to that, but just to notice it, so you're honest with yourself, but that you don't have to go down a rabbit hole, and have a sense of what you're doing, like that day or that week or even that month. I always have a sense of things, but then I'm still only looking at, kind of one thing at a time. So to your point, like getting ready for this podcast, yeah, you have to plan ahead so you can do the research, but you're also not going to be reacting to the pressure of that unnecessarily. So it's sort of like this weird thing of accepting, like, for example, today might be more of a work day, and it won't be quite so as family oriented. And some days are like all family, and work goes by the wayside. So it's just being able to slide in and out of that, I think is pretty helpful. But, and finally, really ultimately taking care of myself first. That always has been a priority, and that helps support me, like, to just deal with the craziness of life.
So, I mean, I think that it's interesting when I hear you say that, and I look at your athletic background, which I really want to dig into, because I feel like that's such a basis. Or I guess the question from me to you is do you feel like your athletic background has helped you create this type of maybe methodology or prioritization model, or do you think it's the other way around, where you were doing that and then sports just happened to be one thing that you did as an interest at the time? Which came first, the chicken or the egg on that one?
I think in my case, because I think athletes can be very different. You can have really, like, my husband's an athlete and he's kind of a creative. I think I was sort of very systematic, even as a kid, about being organized and having sort of an organized environment. And then athletics puts you in these circumstances over and over where, for example, you fail, but you survive. Or you win, or you work for goals, or you learn new skills, or you work with people that are really different than you. So I think athletics creates an environment to build out those skills a little greater. And also to know yourself in a different way. I think there's something really powerful about wanting something and not oftentimes getting it, losing and feeling embarrassed. All of those things. So it absolutely created a playground to develop the skills, but I probably was pre-wired a little bit for some of it. And conversely, I've worked with athletes that I have a very good friend that played in the NBA, and he's sort of free floating and all over the place, but his work capacity is quite high because he played professional sports. So I don't think you always get spit out of sport, more organized necessarily. You probably know how to work and deal with pressure and some physical stuff, but I still think the individual is still there, kind of.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with that. So I'd love to, here at the Greatness Machine, we love origin stories, and you have such a diverse background. If you don't mind, you don't have to go as deep as the pits of the pits, but give us your origin story. I'd love to hear some of the background on what got you into, the sports that you got into. And I know you have a really interesting background. Love to hear it with the audience. Okay.
I'll try to fly through it quickly. My mother's from New York. My father's from Trinidad. They met in California. I don't think they were together for particularly a very long time. and my mother weirdly trained dolphins. And the reason I bring this up is because she worked at a circus in Mexico City, and she was quite young. She was in her early 20s, and my parents were not together. And so I think it was a challenging time for her to do everything. And so I actually ended up living in Long Island, New York, from age 2 to 7 with childhood friends of hers, a couple that didn't have children of their own. And then when I was 7, my mother remarried, and my stepfather is from Puerto Rico. And during that time, when I was 5, my father passed away in a plane crash. Mm-hmm. So I moved down. I was moved down to the Caribbean, down to the Virgin Islands, where I was raised until 11th grade. I dabbled. I was quite tall. I was 6 feet at 12. I was 6'3" at 15. Wow. I dabbled in volleyball a little bit, mostly didn't care about school, and got into mild trouble, but pretty consistent. You live in an island. You look older than you are. You know, it doesn't take big math. You know, and so I was moved to St. Petersburg, Florida, my junior year of high school. Being 6'3", I went to this very small school. They were like, "Oh, you're going to play volleyball and basketball." So I did that on a more serious level. And I think it helped me. I also had really good friends, and at that time that were very supportive for that kind of lifestyle, very different than the Caribbean. And I took to that and ended up getting a scholarship to Florida State, kind of as a surprise to me. I had no idea of going to university or any of that, or certainly not playing volleyball. Ended up at Florida State playing volleyball. During that time, after my freshman year, I started modeling to make money, because I was independent. I was on my own pretty much. And so after my second year, I gave up my scholarship. I paid to play, because back then you didn't have name and likeness like you do now. You had to choose. Right. So I gave up my scholarship. I paid to play because I loved playing volleyball. I loved my team, my coach. And I went back and forth for 2 years, lived in New York, worked, went to school and played ball. Then after I got out of college, I picked up the beach game. Again, I've always been kind of in certain ways a late bloomer, especially athletically. And after living in Miami, after I got out of Florida State, a woman there that I had played with for about a year or two said, "You know, you should move to California and try to play professionally." I didn't know better, which is always good. And I was like, great idea. And I moved to California, where I pursued a professional career in beach volleyball. And, you know, from there, I sort of stopped modeling and became more of just a professional athlete, but I understood kind of the image game a little bit. And right. I was fortunate. It was very good timing. And I signed with Nike. I was the first female to have a design, you know, my own design shoe at Nike. Again, very good timing. People say you don't wear shoes playing beach volleyball. That's true, but you train a lot. So I had what they used to call cross training.
Right.
And so I had a shoe, and then I started writing columns for magazines and doing television. I did a show called MTV Sports and a show called The Extremist. So I was always doing a lot of different things at one time. Because also beach volleyball is a very small sport. And so I think I was, and I wouldn't say I was smart enough to realize that. What I was interested in, I think I was a person who looked ahead. And so I think I understood some of the limitations of beach volleyball, even if you were great. So I asked myself, what are the other things that you're interested in naturally that you think you could do a good job at? And I pursued those as well. So the writing and the TV, because it was fun for me to interview other athletes and do things like that. I met my husband when I was 25 in 95, and he's a surfer. His name is Laird Hamilton. Yeah. And, you know, I started living between California and Hawaii, and we have 3 daughters, and we have since built 2 businesses. I've had a graveyard of other businesses that didn't make it, but in the meantime, you know, I went from professional sports to kind of health and fitness, but it made sense. And so we have XPT, and then in 2015, totally by accident, Laird had this habit of how he drank his coffee, and we also created a company called Laird Superfood that is now publicly traded, it's a very challenging time. So
yeah,
I'm sure there's a lot of gaps, but that gives you some semblance of
Yeah.
I'm here.
So it's funny. One of the questions I wrote, and first of all, thank you for sharing all that. And that was a really concise way of like boiling down a couple decades. I applaud you.
Yeah.
I have a question though. So on going back to the volleyball, especially the pro beach volleyball, when you joined, that was like the early '90s, I guess.
Yeah.
Because you were at Florida State in 1990. How big was the sport then? Because obviously it's a sport that now is gets a lot of hype. Right. But how was it when early 90s, would you say, compared to now?
I think in certain ways it was actually bigger then. We were coming off a sort of a golden time. There were players like Karch Karayan, St. John Smith, and Randy Stokely that really popularized the sport. And it was, I think there was sort of, I know it sounds weird, but there's actually more money in the sport than there is now. It's an interesting dance when you have a lifestyle sport.
Right.
How do you make it all that it can be? So my hope is they've actually have some new people involved in the sport that maybe can help the sport grow. But I came in at a very good time because there were players just right before me that laid down some foundational work that really made it a great opportunity. We had TV, we were on ESPN. There wasn't 1,000 channels, so you could really direct an audience somewhere. And for women, like tennis, just not with as much money, volleyball is a very good sport for women, for TV ratings and, sort of the way you're treated. And I often say it's also because it appears that we do everything the men do. Our net is a bit lower, but there's something about that. It's obviously a very beautiful sport. So it was a very good time for the sport.
And so when you look at the transition, because you obviously became a superstar in that sport, and then as you were mentioning earlier, you parlayed that, using. I guess the question is, do you feel like you leveraged your personal brand at that time? Because personal brand wasn't. I mean, at least from my seat, I'm a little younger, but that wasn't a thing people talked about so much the way they do now, right? Did you feel like that was a key for you to leverage that personal brand to get on TV and to leverage it for these other opportunities?
Yeah, I think what I recognized was that people were not going to see me that often. I wasn't in the NBA. So when they did see me, how do I make that, and without being overly strategic, but somewhat strategic, impactful. So, for example, let's say they asked you to go on like the Tonight Show, right? Nike would say, oh, we want you to wear like a sweatsuit. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to wear a sweatsuit on the Tonight Show. If I go there and I can represent myself and articulate, then maybe people will be interested in me. And then maybe that would be good for my sport or my sponsors. But I also understood that companies like Nike were investing in my image, which does cost money. And so it was really, it was a blend of when the opportunities arrive, just do your best at representing yourself or whatever the thing is that you're representing. And modeling really taught me that, though, because, you go to work, and if you worked with a really good photographer and hair and makeup, your pictures were a lot better. And so I also understood that if I did commercials or whatever, I would ask for the director's reel. I would ask for the concept, because I learned that, I think, working in fashion, which is like, hey, if you can work with really good people, that's really good for you. And so in that way, and because it's not like today where you can go through Instagram or TikTok directly, you had to go through these channels to be seen, whether it was editorial or commercials or other. So it was a different kind of dance.
And like, speaking of that, like what I heard you just touch on is this idea of team, right? And coming from team sports and then leveraging that in the world of team and business. How have you taken that idea and applied it to now, like the business world that you're in right now? Or what's your belief around the best ways as a leader to leverage teams to really take it to the next level?
Well, it's an interesting idea because there's certain things that I'm the leader, and then there's certain things I'm the least, in certain ways qualified person. Like when you talk about Laird Superfood, we have a CEO and a CMO, and they've worked with other companies. So I think it's knowing, first of all, culture, your culture for your company. It's like the culture of your team or your family. I obviously that is very important. And and allowing people to do their parts and stepping in when it's your part and over delivering when you can. I think that's another thing. I think it's about being a good teammate yourself first, but protecting that culture, making sure you don't get that weird, just, backbiting or that kind of a culture. And listen, it's important to be somebody who knows what they're doing. And so sometimes you can do a startup and the person who starts the company is not maybe going to be the person who's going to run the company at a different time. That was really an uncomfortable realization for me, which is, especially when you talk about business, there's sort of these different phases and levels and different types of people, different skill sets that are more appropriate. And so as a team person, realizing that, oh yeah, this team will only be together for this period of time, and then it will be appropriate for like these other people to come in. That was sort of that was hard for me. But you realize the most important thing you can do is be accountable yourself and step in. And also, when is it time for you to work for somebody? So there's times it doesn't matter if we created Laird Superfood. I need to have the attitude of I'm there to work for my CEO and my CMO and the company. And not like, well, this is our company and we started it, because that's not going to get us anywhere. So I think I say this in my marriage. I say there's times I'll be behind you and supporting you, times I'm next to you, and there's going to be times I might be in front and be like, hey, let's go this way. So I think it's being able to also be adaptable and slide around whatever's needed.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's such an interesting concept of not being confined by one role, right? And I think a lot of people, I mean, it may be that you're just a highly adaptable person, which it really seems that way when you start looking at all the different things you've done. But I think at least from what I've seen, you don't probably know much about me, but I was CEO of a company at 1,000 employees. And I mean, I'm a very, very adaptable person, but I found that a lot of folks aren't. What do you think? Like, I mean, for me, it's just natural. I'm pretty adaptable. And how do you think people can take on that role of adaptability more so to again get what they want, which is what we're talking about here?
Well, you know this as somebody who works with 1,000 people. We're all different, and there might be people who are like, hey, I like to punch a clock. I like to come in at 9 and leave at 5. I don't want to think about work, and I'm okay that I have a boss. You're probably not like that. I would rather do the extra work. I'd rather think about it 7 days a week. I'd rather think about it at 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. and be a part of that. So first it's recognizing maybe somebody really does want to just sort of give me my marching orders. I'll do that really well. I'm good. But for people who are sort of saying, hey, I want to have more responsibility and more creativity, and maybe I don't really ultimately want to answer to somebody, I think it's about doing things even when it's uncomfortable for you. There are so many times where I'm like, ugh, this feels uncomfortable, or our ego, let's say, for example, we put on an XPT event. This is just a very superficial example. And at the end of the night, let's say there's a dinner and we do it at some weird place and they've rented tables and chairs. Well, guess what? We have a crew of people that can pick up the tables and chairs. But like Laird especially, it's like, yeah, no, we're going to fold tables and fold chairs and help load it up, right? And so I think it's also seeing, where's there a need, and can I be the person who just steps in? And that is, I think, helps with being adaptable instead of, well, that's not my job. It's like, okay, well, that's great. And I think if you talk to any person, scientist or person who's truly in health and fitness, I'm not talking about pretend people, I'm talking about the real people. Everything in health comes down to adaptability. And so if I'm trying to be as healthy as I can, whatever that means, as kind, as loving, as strong, my cholesterol is low, whatever people define as health, I also have to be pliable and try it different than what is also comfortable for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it kind of goes back to how we started the show, which was this idea of like doing hard, right? Like embracing the suck. And I love the example you used of, yeah, we're done at the event. Sure, there's people that can load the tables up, but we're going to do it, right?
And we're going to help.
And I think that, we're going to help, right? Like and in researching for this interview, there was this, you guys got interviewed for Tools for Titans, Tim's book, Tim Ferriss's book. And there was a concept I found in there that you had talked about with Tim that I was like, I love this, because I was like, that's me. And you said you talked about the importance of going first, which I feel like that's kind of what you're talking about, which is this, like, I'm not going to wait for someone else to fold the tables up. I'm going to go first. I'm going to be the leader, right? Would you mind telling us about that? Because when I saw that, I'm like, that's me. I'm always the guy that raises my hand first. But yeah, tell me about like where you came up with that, how you think about that, because that's what I'm hearing right now a little bit. When
I was with Tim Ferriss came over, and I was with Laird and a gentleman named Brian McKenzie, who's a movement specialist, and he was just asking us questions as Tim does so well. And at the end, he goes, "Hey, one thing, if you could say one thing or one thing that you believe in." And I had never really verbalized it, but at that moment, I just said, "Yeah, just be willing to go first." Like, I learned this, I think, being a very large woman. I feel compelled to make people feel comfortable, at least initially, because I'm 6'3". I would go, and so in every situation I would say good morning first, hello first. If somebody needs help, I'm happy to say, "Hey, do you need a hand?" Like, no problem. And also, growing up in the Caribbean, that was just more the way it is. And so I said, just be willing to go first, because what you also see is that other people want to, they're just afraid of rejection, or will I look silly, or whatever. And so for me, that's how that came up. And also, in talking about being adaptable, it's also being willing to do the extra. And when you don't see the immediate return, I think that there's another part of that tale that I want to make sure I don't forget, which is, you do the extra to do the extra, not because of what will I get. That's why, like, a VC guy his head would explode, because they're always looking for the exact, ROI, where in life or in business, I don't always think it's a 1-for-1. And sometimes, by the way, it's a 1-for-4. Like, that happens too, but that usually takes time.
Yeah. It's funny. I have a good friend. He calls it ROR, return on respect.
Yeah.
And I think that I do think we live in a world where people are, I hate to say it, but they're optimizing for the even trade, to your point. Like, oh, what percentage, I got to give exactly what I got. And there's a book by Ed Milet called The Power of One More, where he talks about this. Like, I'm going to do one more. I'm going to do one more. And I just heard you say that. So, you had also in the interview with Tim, you guys talked about that people are opting out now, right? And that we live in a world of opting out, people, like not raising their hands, not going first. Do you think that this kind of goes back to this idea of living in a comfortable world, being comfortable, overly comfortable, and people not really wanting to get uncomfortable, where I would assume you're going to agree with what I'm about to say, which is that's where the growth is. That's, the strain on the vine creates the good wine, right? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, I want to also add a layer of empathy for the group much younger, 2 generations younger than me. So if you are, below 30, now, if you go first, you will have constant commentary, right? I only had to deal with my immediate group when I was growing up and because listen, let's face it, when you're a teenager in your 20s, it's harder to be exposed that way. And so, but I only had to deal with the group around me. I mean, granted, it was great when you had a team, because if you made a mistake, they would give you so much shit that you were just like, they'd be like, "Oh, nice job, good shot," or whatever. So you kind of got a little medal doing that. But ultimately, it was still the group that had access to you in that moment. And then, as I had a public job, maybe it was just people who watched me on a TV or read something in a newspaper, but they couldn't actually connect with me to criticize me. Now, you've got a group that's going like, I feel inspired to go, but I don't want to hear it. And so I want to add that, because we're not really meant to have that many people have access and eyeballs to us, and then on top of it, be able to comment. So I really want to encourage people that, hey, listen, it's almost like a decision that you have to be like, okay, everybody's firing their guns. I'm just going to run out there, because I think it's too hard otherwise. I didn't have to do that getting my bearings. So I really want to give people kind of an extra support or credit because that's what they're dealing with. Because as you get a little older, you're kind of like, yeah, okay, it's fine, like. But sure. I think to get going and to get momentum into like, hey, I want to go first. And then to have everybody shut you down right away, it's not the most encouraging environment to do that.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I do think to your point, though, if it comes naturally to you, then that's a gift that maybe God has given you so that you'll just do it, right? Like, I'm a person that, like, when I bomb in front of people. And I was at TED and we had like a group event and we had to like share a scar we had. And I was like, I'm going to be funny and make up a fake scar. And it bombed. Like, I had 1,000 people looking at me and like they're like, this guy's not funny. And I was like, all right, well, sometimes you bomb, right? To your point.
Well, that's it.
But you go for it.
And at the end, here's what I know to be so true. The people that love me, they love me, and the people who I respect their opinion, those are people that I know. I mean, there's people I'm inspired by that I don't know, but ultimately, if we can try to remember that it's really only as much heat as we give it. If someone makes a snarky comment to me online, at the end of the day, it only lives because I give it life. Now, that is a hard learned lesson that has taken a lot of practice, but I also feel maybe that people are going to get so also tone deaf to all the BS and the criticism that's just people having a bad day looking to aim and shoot at somebody. Right. That maybe they're going to be like, oh, who cares? But I think you're right. It's like if you have it in you, you got to go for it because we can't let the opinions of other people hold us back because no matter what we do and how well-intended we are, someone somewhere, even people who really know us, they're not going to like us. They're not going to agree. So you might as well, go for it and honor yourself.
Yeah. Haters are going to hate, right? It's like, you're not going to please everybody. In business, one of the things that that I promote and that I do is I always interview my team. I'll survey my team and we ask them how they're feeling and we ask them like what we could do better. And we ask them, like, would they recommend friends to work for the company and all these best practices. And I remember I had a conversation with a friend of mine who he just got elected mayor of Vancouver, like literally like a month ago. And his name's Ken Sim. And I said, Ken, like 9 out of 10 of my employees, they'd say they love working for me, but I always have that one. And he just looks at me. We're in New York City at late night eating soup. And he's like, he has this funny Canadian accent. He's like, Darius, haters are going to hate.
Yeah.
And from that moment forward, I was like, you know what? You can't please everybody. And I think that's where we live in a world where, to your point earlier, like people like shouldn't have this level of connectivity where they can comment on every little thing you do. It's kind of bullshit, right? And I'm Gen X, right? So I'm on the cusp. I graduated high school right when the internet was coming out, So I say I'm like fluent in analog and digital, but today's generation is all digital. They're born in an environment where you get hammered from every angle if you put something out there. When you grew up, you made a point that you were 6'3", right? So probably without trying, you stood out, that's obviously tall for a woman. Right. And so do you think that gave you like, what did you see that as like an asset or a liability from a confidence standpoint?
Well, when you're young going through puberty, it's a nightmare, right? Because everywhere you go, first of all, people think you're much older and they stare at you. And a teenage girl, the last thing she wants is to be stared at.
Right.
However, but then I turn 18 and everyone's like, oh, it's fabulous. It's fabulous. And then I go into fashion and all they keep saying is, because I was big even for fashion, but I worked and I would have editors from Italian Vogue going, you're just so giant and nothing fits. Like they're opening clothes, trying to cinch it. So in a way, it was an interesting thing because I had to look at it in the face all the time and like, oh, your feet are too big. And oh, she doesn't fit that. And oh, she doesn't fit this. Yeah. And you just have to be like, oh yeah, like this is who I am. I can't really change this. And then conversely, the great gift back to me was I go to volleyball and it was like, yo, the bigger, the better. So I'm like, depending on what universe you're in, one thing is awesome. And one thing is like, oh, how are we going to find something? So I thought you better make up your mind for yourself.
Right.
And, something else I've learned from one of my daughters, who in ways is quite a lot wiser than I am, is it's sort of like when you can not separate yourself from the criticism, so what my point is it's like the compliments are the same and so are the criticisms. And I've often felt that way, especially about the compliments, where I'm like, okay, I'm not going to take that too serious, but that to sort of realize everything is everything, and it's all happening simultaneously. And at the end of the day, if you can just stay tuned into what's going to keep you excited about getting up every day and make you feel like you're honoring yourself and the way you're trying to live, regardless. And by the way, I don't have to have everybody understand how I feel. I don't need people to think and feel like me. I'm okay with like somebody feeling differently. You can free up a lot of space, emotional and time, when you just go like, oh yeah, when we were saying earlier, like hard, easy, fun, boring. It's like everything is everything. And I think that, it's a hard place to get to, and it's a loud world. It's hard to go inside yourself and get those moments of going like, how do I feel? What do I want? Who am I? But I really would encourage people to keep trying to fight for that real estate just a little bit, because then your life will you'll move based on that voice. And I usually feel like we end up at a pretty good place when we have that opportunity to do that.
Yeah, so it's like that alignment around who you are, right? Then you can just double down on it. You're touching on something that I was curious about, because I read that you and your husband, you guys work out 6 times a week. Mm-hmm. Obviously, fitness is a really big part of who you are in your life. But I think right now we live in a world where mental health is so important as well. And I can tell you, there's 100 different things you can go out there and do for physical health, and there's a million different things we can do for mental health, but there's a lot of noise as well. How are you, like, when you're approaching mental health in your life or in your family's life, what are some of the practices that you've really leaned into to, create a better you?
Well, okay, so I'll speak to this from 2 angles, because most of the people I speak to are scientists and doctors and what have you on my show. Okay. And 50% of them have to talk to me about mental health. What I will say is, personally, I have always used movement as the tool to help me to get to a place of sort of a mental and emotional homeostasis. Yes, I at one point was using physical fitness just for a performance improvement in volleyball. I don't play volleyball anymore. And I also understand the gift of health. Okay, so that's why I train. However, why I really train is so that I can stay sane, because physiologically I have a better fighting chance if I can have, serotonin releases and endorphins, and I can be tired and all these other things. Now, if you want to go to a much deeper level about mental health, there's something that's happened culturally, which is every time we feel anxious or depressed, we say we're anxious or depressed, but we're not. Having anxiety and having depression is very, very different than feeling anxious and depressed. So what happened is, culturally, people they don't know the difference, and they attach to it, and then they self-identify with it. And I think what would be really important is for people not to use that as a get off the hook, but also to understand, if you talk to somebody who genuinely has anxiety or genuinely is depressed, it's really different. Now, as a human being, do I feel anxiety? 100% all the time. It's showing up. Are there days where I'm not fired up to get out of bed? Sure. So would someone say that I felt depressed in that moment? I don't know, for a millisecond, maybe, but I'm not depressed. So one is, I would say, let's not take these coats on and wear them. 1, 2, if we can get our physiology, just the avatar, the chemistry, as good as we can get it. So that means our gut health. That means just moving around, trying to eat foods that support feeling good. Because, by the way, if I eat a donut right now in 30 minutes, I'm in less of a good mood.
Sure.
And that's just chemistry. That's not a thing. That's not my childhood coming back to haunt me. So I guess what I want to say is I want to encourage people that it is just simply a tool. There's a book that by Dr. Chris Palmer. He has been in psychotherapy for over 27 years. He's worked with anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar, like serious and mild conditions, right? And what he says about our brain is that we not only have mental health in our brain, but we have metabolic health of our brain. And he's like, listen, Gabby, no one's ever thrived on 12 medications. So he's through his own practice by getting people physically healthier. He's either lowered their dosage and some of them have gotten off their medication altogether. And he'll go, I've had patients get off their medication for 5 to 7 years. And I go, what happens at 5 to 7 years? And he goes, they think they're totally cured. They go off the rails. They go drinking, they eat whatever. And then they have a relapse. So Brain Energy is an interesting book if people want to check it out. If you're sitting and breathing, this is a really small little hack that's very easy. When people are sitting working, you should never be mouth breathing. Never. You should always be nose breathing. The only time we should be mouth breathing is like if we've done sprints on a track. And what happens is then the breath through the nasals goes down deeper into the tummy. So it slows everything down. It downregulates us, keeps us in our parasympathetic, our calm. So if we're mouth breathing, we are breathing anywhere from like 10 to 12 to 13 breaths per minute. When we're nasal breathing, we'll go down to about 3 or 5. So food is number one.
Okay.
It's just number one. I wish it wasn't. It's what we eat really can start to push us in one direction or another. When people hear about gut health, it's a very real thing. And I wouldn't be so quick if you're having a hard time to run to the doctor because they will write you a prescription. Yeah. And I
love that.
What I would encourage people is to say, first of all, you have some more power than you realize, even when it feels like it doesn't. And there are really good resources out there to help heal. And it's worth it. Like if you said to me, I'd say, take my house, take everything I own if I could keep my health.
Yeah, I have a good friend that he said, oh gosh, I'm going to butcher this right now, but I'm going to try anyway. He says like, you show me a sick man, and the only thing that they're worried about is their health, right? Like you give them one wish, they're not going to wish for anything else, right?
Yeah.
And I completely just destroyed that. What the cool way of saying that?
I get it. Well, and also I want to remind people something else. We are isolated. We are more isolated. If they can make the effort in this go first part, go first. And it takes work, and it's kind of even a pain in the butt. Connect with people. Like, we cannot function no matter who we are. I don't care how many push-ups and sit-ups and how many, high protein diets we eat. If we are not connecting with people and ourselves and a sense of purpose, it really doesn't matter what we do. It's going to be hard to feel good.
Yeah, I love that. And and this is stuff that was normal before, right? Like this is like, back in the day, it's like, no, like there was community and you ate the local farm stuff because you couldn't get in from anywhere. And, people just seemed, obviously the old world had its own problems, but we live in this world of, to your point, disconnectivity and, complacency and processed foods. And then people are like, I'm not feeling good. Here's a pill. And it's like, no,
well, and
unwind this.
You talked about adaptability, right? And so here's the deal. I could sit here and be like, I can't believe it. Forget it. It is what it is, but we live unnaturally. So now we have to adapt and do weird things like get together and consciously try to eat real food to pull it. And so I try not to look at it like, can you believe it? It is how it is. So what are we going to do to adapt so that we can be our best selves?
I think a big part of this also is around values, right? And I think that people have gotten away from their core values. I'm a core value evangelist. Like you couldn't find someone who's more into core values than me, maybe equally. And so when I look at it, it's just a real simple question. I always say, like, are we working in our talents, living in our values, and doing it with a high level of awareness, right? And from a health perspective. And I feel like when you nail all those three things, life is good. And what do you think about that?
Well, I think we're being told, again, it's that we don't have that room because our technology is on top of us. And then you add, it's very combative, right? Like combative is provocative and is very good and sells a lot. So there's a lot of it. And I think that people have to realize there's a lot of really good people in the world, and they want really kind of the same things that they do.
Totally.
And so if you can be that, then you will continue to attract that. And then also it will reignite your hope that, oh yes, people are good. And that's why we can't be isolated. And I just think, but you've got to drill down and have the discipline to understand, who am I? What do I believe? What am I willing to stand and live consistently as? And I think once we can lock that in, and accountability is a huge thing. We can't blame. Yes, there might be really unfair circumstances happening to somebody. I understand that bad things happen to good people, but that's not going to help us. So what can we do? And I said this in a book I wrote. We've all been given low and high cards. What are our high cards? How do we play those? How do we help get those to help us navigate to a place we want to be? Or we can sit and complain and talk about how unfair it is, because life is unfair. It is. Oh yeah.
Yeah, totally. No. And I think the minute you accept that, then you're one step ahead, because you're like, all right, it's not meant to be fair. It's meant to be what it is. And you work with what you got, to your point. I want to pivot a little bit. And I know that we got about 15 minutes left. So I want to be respectful of your time. I think most people would consider you and your husband a power couple. You guys both, you guys are, and you've been around for a long time. I believe you got married in 97. So you guys have been married for 25 years. And in the public spotlight, I would assume there's a lot of pressure associated with that. And when most people, when they think of, quote unquote famous married couples, they're like, yeah, they don't last. They break up. That's like the norm. What do you like? How do you feel like you've been able to balance all these different things? Because you guys seem to do a lot of stuff together, right? Business, life, all these amazing things. How have you guys been able to keep it all together? Because I think like that is a great representation of a lot of the things we're talking about right now.
Well, first of all, I think we have a low level of notoriety, which is helpful because you don't have as much noise coming your way. So it's not it's not like a Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. It's like, it's something very different than that. I will give the credit actually first to my husband, because, Laird is a very unique person. He was raised on the island of Kauai. He rides, he's out in the ocean. He rides very large waves. So his teacher is pretty, he has a pretty powerful teacher in Mother Nature. And he is the most, he has been able to develop as a person who stays pretty clear. He doesn't get distracted. I could get more distracted than him. He's so clear about what's important that I think he also grounds the whole house into that. We all get grounded through his clarity. And I really appreciate that. But in a way, he's very complex, but also so very simple. It's like, hey, we need to take care of ourselves. We need to love each other. For him, he has a very deep passion to surf waves, and he loves his family. He could, if he didn't have surf, I think he could also be in jail. So it could have gone either way, quite frankly. It's like this very intense person. Yeah. But white noise he's not looking around. He's not like, oh, shiny things. He's pretty clear. And nice. I think nature does that to people. I think when you spend time with anyone, if you meet people who do anything really a lot in nature, they're not buying some of the trends. They understand it. He uses his phone to look at weather, but they haven't bit that. And also, as far as working together, we respect each other, and it's sort of like, that's more your area. You do that. I don't question you. And vice versa. It's not always easy. Listen, we're a married couple. Like,
Sure.
we've made it through a few rough patches, and to get new skills, because they don't teach you that. And I also think as you are longer with a person, you understand you're pretty fortunate if you can find somebody that you love and respect and even, I'm going to be superficial, that you're attracted to, like, that you can have chemistry, that you can be together, and that your values, I always say we're very different people, very different, but our values are very similar.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah. And I hope that if you're married to someone that you find them attractive.
I know, but it's like, sometimes you get like, oh, freaked out. I'm like, listen, I'm just being honest. Like, if you don't have chemistry, I have chemistry with my girlfriends. Like, it's like, you just have chemistry with people and you're just like, I love them, and I feel that way about Laird, but I give Laird a lot of the credit. I think I do something for our relationship, but I think he is really like this grounding heart for myself and my daughters. Even though we bucket, we're like, oh gosh, but we know he's right.
Oh yeah. But that's how it goes. When you're comfortable, you can't, it's like, I always say, it's like, no one wants to hear from, their mom or dad. They want to hear it from someone else,
Yeah.
It's
an expert, somebody who lives a mile away.
Yeah. I love that. That's a great quote. So let's talk about current projects. You talked a little bit about them earlier, but you guys have the business SIS. We have the business SIS. You guys are working with tons of cool people. Talk to us about EPT. Is it XPT? Excuse me.
Extreme. Yeah. XPT.
Yeah. Sorry.
It's okay. You've had your Thanksgiving. Yeah. You're getting your Thanksgiving wave coming at you. XPT was just a business that we started around health and fitness, and there's some interesting modalities. There's breathing. We have a breathing app, and there's mobility, and we do we have a pool training with weights that you go into the deep end. Yeah. So if you're trying to train really hard but not have impact your joints, it's actually really excellent for that. And we work with a ton of athletes that come either recovering from injuries or are looking to improve performance. Because one of the things about the water that's so great is it's objective. So if it's like, hey, that's not good enough, it's not picking on you. And right. I have an artificial knee and Laird has an artificial hip. So we're always looking for ways to train very hard without continuing to damage our bodies. And I really love XPT because one of the things I want to say to people is if somebody says to you, hey, there is one way to be healthy, like you should only eat this way and only do this movement, run. I think we're all unique and it's also always changing. There's elements that are ever changing. So there's no absolutes. But the fundamentals, listen, you have to get to sleep. And people can say, I go to bed at 1 and I get up at 9. Those are the wrong 8 hours. We're still connected to the sun, whether we like it or not. The breathing, if we can get that right, that's a big win. The food, the movement, stress management. And again, that community, I think we don't really value that as much. So XPT is great for us because then we work with a lot of people and it's like a continued classroom.
Yes. Yeah, I saw that. Saw some of the folks you guys have worked with. It seems really interesting. I have a question on the mouth breathing because I don't know if maybe it's from me like doing research, but suddenly something got into my feed and the algorithms like start showing this guy mouth tape.
Right. Oh,
so
yeah.
I started seeing like mouth tape. Yeah. Right. And I was like, I mean, you don't know me, but I used to have sleep apnea and I lost a bunch of weight and I used to snore and I don't snore anymore. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I can't imagine anything touching my face when I sleep. Like that just seems, but what do you think about the mouth tape thing?
I think it's really good. And there's brands out there that they're sort of really soft and gentle on you. And a lot of people have success with that. And also our children should be sleeping with their mouth closed because your jaw development also, and the structure of your jaw can be preserved when you're not sleeping with your mouth open. Your teeth don't oxidize as much. And also because your tongue is allowed to move to the roof of your mouth, that will keep opening your jaw. And so for little kids, it makes space for the teeth and it keeps that jaw wide. So it's really worth it. I know.
So do you think like a mouth device for kids, or you're taping your kid's mouth shut?
Well, honestly, most kids probably naturally are doing it right, but it would be worth seeing and making sure just that they're in the habit of doing it and comfortable. But yes, you can tape it. The tape is it's not the tape. It's not, don't rip it off. It's almost like a silicone piece that just gently keeps the mouth closed. And it might be irritating for a night or two, but it's really, really worth it. Another thing that's interesting with children is for parents to make sure that they're not tongue tied. So a lot of kids underneath, if the tongue is too short, the tongue isn't allowed then to drift up to the top of the roof of the mouth. And so that can also impact jaw development and room for teeth, etc.
I read a thing recently that said like people that tape their mouth shut, that actually like makes them look younger and it slows the aging process. Have you heard this?
Now you know how to get the audience to do it. I'm like, for healthy reasons and this, people are blah, blah, blah. You will look younger. Look, people will be like, what's the tape?
Done.
But think about as we get older, our jaw starts to collapse in, right? And that's part of it, where we have these think about women, what they're doing. They're putting all this filler and all this stuff in their face. And it's to look younger. So when you have your mouth shut and the jaw stays wide, when we think of alpha men, they always have this big wide jaw. It's all connected to something very primal. And so, yes. Right.
All right. You got me motivated. There was one I saw that was like cover the whole mouth, and I was like, oh, that doesn't look comfortable.
No. I wish I could. I want to find the brand. There is a brand. I think that, so for people listening, Patrick McCune or James Nestor wrote a book called Breathe, and both of them will have very good suggestions on what's the best tape. I know there is one tape that they all love that you can get anywhere, and it's not expensive.
Yeah, I saw you interviewed James on your show, right?
Yeah, he's awesome.
He's
so cool.
I haven't read it. I saw him get interviewed. I was like, my people are approaching him because we want him on the show. But I would love to check out that show that you did. Speaking of that, I want to talk about your show, right? I know we're getting towards the end here, and listeners, look, I'm a big fan of promoting great podcasts, and it sounds like you got a great one. I looked at your lineup of all the different people you had. You've had some amazing, interesting people on the show. But tell us about the Gabby Reece show.
My hope with the show is just to have conversations, not so dissimilar to what we're having now, with people that I call the sharp end of the stick. So they really are best in class at what they do, but disseminated down at kind of a 6th grade level. Because my findings have been, good health and good information shouldn't be just for this special group, or for people who can understand it or who have time to wade through it. Or like Laird and I, who come from sports, where we've had people who are, really been great mentors or helped us. So how do we get that information to the people who are too busy and need it the most? And they don't have as many resources, whether it's time or money, to throw at taking care of themselves. So my hope is just to talk to really smart and good people, and find out, like, hey, what are 3 things, like, hopefully, like, when someone's done listening, it's like 3 things that they go, you know what, I could maybe start to mess around with that or incorporate that into my life. And, I have sometimes, like, I've had comedians or other people who maybe I just want to know, you were doing it this way, or this seems to be working. Why is that working?
Yeah. That's so cool. So people can find you. We're going to put all this stuff in the show notes, but GabrielleReece.com is where they can, is that the best place?
Or even GabbyReece.com is fine. I think both.
Yeah. We were talking about earlier on the show, Gabby Reece is probably easier and it's with a Y for folks that can't spell, but GabbyReece.com or GabrielleReece.com, and we'll put that in the show notes.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, my gosh, this has been amazing. I have one last thing, and then I'll let you get on your way. But, here at the Greatness Machine, as I mentioned earlier, we're all about, creating greatness in the world. And we always like to ask our guests a parting question. So I always want to know, and the question I ask is, what is the biggest barrier that you think holds people back from creating greatness in the world? And how have you overcome this in your journey?
I don't think I approach it that I'm putting greatness into the world. I think what holds people back is they think it has to be great, but maybe if they go with the spirit of, I'm here, I'm a unique person, whatever scale I'm on, big or small, I don't know what that means. I have a purpose, and maybe multiple purposes, right? You've had probably a few chapters in your life. And one of my responsibilities is to fulfill that purpose and contribute to the world that I'm in. And I always say, listen, if you're like a new mom and you're of service to your family, you're contributing to your children. And then maybe it's your neighbor, and then maybe your block. And guess what? That's significant. And so I think people get held back of fear that they're not good enough, or it's not interesting enough, or what can I do? And I think that if we keep our heads down and we just sort of keep tapping into who am I? What's my purpose? How do I put that into the world in a way that, you sort of think, am I tipping towards the positive? I think if we have a North Star that's like, does this feel kind of positive? Then you just don't know where it leads you. Yeah,
I love that. Gabby Reece, what an honor and pleasure to have you on the Greatness Machine. This has been seriously an amazing amount of gratitude from me to you for coming here and sharing all your knowledge. You've done so many cool things in the world, and I can't wait to see what's next.
Well, I appreciate being on here. And also, I want to finish by saying to people, even if you're quite young, like a teenager, I think, we all have something special to give. So don't let how much experience you have, what your background is, what your family is, what your education is, none of that. Don't let that keep you from contributing, because it's all important.
So I couldn't agree more. I think that from my position, we're here to do that. And my father, passed away when I was 22 years old, but he was from Iran, Persian guy. And he said, don't ever listen to anyone who's not more successful than you are. So screw the naysayers, go do your thing.
Yeah.
Plenty of people are going to tell you can't do stuff. They don't know. They've never done it. So I've kind of lived with that, and served me pretty well. And sounds like it's done the same for you.
So far, I still have a ways to go.
Yeah. We're like at the third of the waypoint, another 100 years.
You are. I'm like halfway, buddy.
No way.
Well, I hope you feel better.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Thank you so much again for being here. And for the listeners of the show, please, if you love what you heard here, like us, follow us, give us a review, and go check out Gabby's show and all the great things that she and Laird are doing. With that said, peace out. We love you guys.
Aloha.
You are listening to The Greatness Machine, and that's a wrap for today. Listen, if you love what you heard, subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform that you're tuning in on, so that you don't miss any of our future episodes. We have tons of great people coming on, and we're stoked to have you here to enjoy it with us. Leave us a review. Tell us what you love most about this particular episode. We love getting the reviews. We love to see what you guys love most. And if this particular episode, made you think of someone who's leveling up in their business and in their life, print screen, share it with them. Leaders are the best givers, and after all, we're all here to support and grow with each other. And in case you want to see some of the fun behind the scenes shots or some of the things that we're doing, I'm actually writing about this in my weekly newsletter. Go to www.therealdarius.com and subscribe to my newsletter. We're talking about fun things like business and life and mindfulness and cryptocurrencies and gosh, I don't even know, everything and anything, but it's tons of fun stuff I write about. I try to get it out on a weekly basis. You can subscribe at www.therealdarius.com. And with that said, look, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. I love you. Peace. We're out of here. See you guys on the next one.
She's my lover.